Ah, what a mesechta. Ooh,
Loaded, Baruch Hashem. Loaded.
mamish. Second. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Trumais, Perek Aleph, Halacha Beis, and Halacha Gimel. We're learning today Daf Yud Aleph, and we left off on Daf Yud Aleph, Amad Aleph, on the top line by the dot. So where are we up to? The Gemara on Daf Yud Amad Beis brought a brisa in which Rabbi Yossi disagrees with the Mishnah that we'll have on Daf Tezayin. The topic is what were to happen if someone separates Truma from Tamei product for Tahard product. Of course, lechatchila, one should not do that, because what can the kohen do already with a Truma Tameya? I mean, he can benefit only from its fuel, but he can't eat it. Nevertheless, even though the Mishnah says that if you did it b'mezid, this is really midrabanan, it doesn't matter. But if you did it b'mezid, that separation is ineffective. So says the Mishnah. In a brayso we have, Rabbi Yossi says, no, bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, post facto, it will be effective. The Gemara came with a gavaldika logic, that it must be that Rabbi Yossi Bechlal did not have the Mishnah of Halacha Beis the way we have it. Why not? What did we have in the Mishnah Halacha Beis? We had that if you separate oil, if you separate olives for oil, it's not effective. And by the way, that's not only Lebeis Hillel, that's even Lebeis Shammai, right? The olives for the oil is ineffective. Why? Gezel hashevet. And let's go with the first interpretation of the Gemara, because you're making the kohen nebach, instead of him getting oil, he's only going to get olives. And the olives are meant to be made into oil. He has to work hard, a lot of laborious work. Not valid. So the Gemara says, if Rabbi Yossi holds that bidi eved, even b'mezid, you shouldn't do it, but if you did it, tomei and tohar is effective, then of course he'll hold bidi eved, olives for oil should be effective. Olives, the kohen would much rather get olives that have tohar, even though he has to work to make it into oil. At least at the end of the day, he gets oil. Musman Zagin, that he didn't have our girsa. He had a whole different version. And how one thing affects the other. The whole reason why Beis Hillel says none of it is effective is because Beis Hillel doesn't want for you to have demua from the outset. But it won't be demua. Everything will be effective. That is a logic. And we're going to begin today, and this is such a good yisoid, that on one hand, when we learn Torah, we have to use our mind. On the other hand, our svarim can never go against that which it says explicit. That's the whole challenge we have. In other words, the Torah Shebal Pen, not only Torah Shebachsav, if you find a Tana, right by us, if you find a Gemara, if it says a certain thing, that's the emes. Then we have to break our minds. We have to really work to make sense of it. We have to make sense of it. But the Yisoid is that which is written. So what we're going to have basically today is a brayso in which Rabbi Yossi learned halacha beis the way we have it, and therefore the svara that we just said is going to be knocked off its feet. Halacha Gimel, Mishnah Gimel on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph is going to continue to speak about many truma separations that will be invalid, not only lechatchila, even b'di'evid. And all of them, or almost all of them, have a commonality, have a theme, and that is that you cannot separate min haptur ala chiyuv, which is very important. We already mentioned this. Just the biggest example: once you separate truma gedola, that which remains is exempted, is already misukan from truma gedola. It's patur to have truma gedola removed from it. Right? We're going to call it chulin, even though it's not really chulin, because after Truma Gedoyla, you can't eat it. You have to separate Meiser Rishon, you have to separate Meiser Sheni, but we're calling it chulin as far as Truma Gedoyla is concerned. You can never separate from chulin more for tevel, even though a guy would argue, why not? This is chulin. I have another pile of tevel. The point is the kohen has to get a certain percent. I'll make it min hamukif. I'll put it together. Doesn't work that way. You cannot separate min aptur ala chiyuv. Now, the Mishnah also mentions you cannot separate min al chiyuv al aptur. And we're going to have a chazara at the end of Daf Yud Aleph for something that we learned yesterday. What did we learn yesterday? We learned the machloekes amiroyim between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan. And that is, our Mishnah Halacha Beis was speaking about separating olives for oil. What were to happen if you separate oil for olives? Oil is already mechuyev because it's already a finished product, a completed product. Olives that are made, that are harvested for oil, are not finished. If you separate oil for olives, so if you remember, there was a machloekes between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan. We'll review it when we learn it inside, and that will very much play into how to understand the pshat in our Mishnah, or whether our Mishnah is ledivrei hakoil, or whether our Mishnah is not ledivrei hakoil, because our Mishnah not only tells us that you cannot separate min haptur al chiyuv, our Mishnah says you also may not separate min chiyuv al haptur. And one final side, which is not such a big side, the obligation to tithe has to do with product that grows in the Holy Land. What happens if you have produce that grows in chutz la'aretz, but it was brought to its gemar melacha in Eretz Yisrael? So I have a field, let's say here in LA, and you harvest it, you take the grain to the Holy Land, you make the meruach and all the steps prior to it, but the key is you bring it to the time of chiyuv in Eretz Yisrael. We will learn today that produce has to be tithed mida oiraisa. Elama, since it's product from chutz la'aretz, you cannot tithe it for product of Eretz Yisrael, nor can you separate from produce that grew in Eretz Yisrael for it. Amazing, huh? Ad kedei kach that we have to separate. You can't tithe produce from one halachic year for another halachic year, and many, many more details that we'll learn when we learn the Mishnah. But Chavra, we're beginning on Daf Yud Aleph. Okay, so by that dot. So now that we logically came to the conclusion that according to the Tana Rabbi Yossi, separating from olives for olives and oil, the key is for the oil. Our Mishnah says, post facto, it's not effective. Can't be Rabbi Yossi had our Mishnah. Because Rabbi Yossi, if al hatome, al hatoir, b'di'eved, even b'mezit is okay, avade from olives and oil, for sure it will be okay. However, says the Gemara, ashkech tane, but someone in the yeshiva, you can't make this up. They found a braisa. The braisa was learned b'shem Rabbi Yossi, and you'll see the braisa says exactly what our Mishnah says, which is, ein toiramin, not zeisim al hashemen, nor another malayayin. Don't forget, everything that we are learning is equal. Olives for oil, grapes for wine. Now, ve'im taram, not the same thing. Beishamai yoimrim trumas atzman bahem. Beishamai says that the olives are effective. The olives for the oil are not effective, right? Gezel hashevet. And therefore, what will end up at the end is that what you have is a mixture of truma and chulin. Remember that? Why truma and chulin? Because what you had in mind to separate for the oil is not effective. So that won't become truma. Why will it become chulin? Because since you have in mind to rectify the olives, so therefore what you separated l'shem truma for the olives will rectify all of the olives. Even the olives that you were intending for it to become truma for the oil, that was not effective. So that now will become rectified through the olives that you separated for the olives. So some of it is going to be truma. Some of it will become the rectified olives. You don't know what is what. You don't have the ratio of 100 to 1, so you're going to have to deal with dimua. And Beisil al-Oimrim, ein truma say truma. I agree with Beis Shammai that the olives for the oil, even b'di'evid, is not valid. However, even though there are many dinim of dimua, but I will not allow, says Beis Hillel, for us to have dimua from the outset. That we don't allow. So the Chachamim somehow have the power to say that what you did is completely ineffective. I don't know if that was during a class, but I spoke out with the Gabbai, like, how does that work? If I did something at Doiraisa, it was Truma, how can the Chachamim say it's not Truma? because the Chachamim have the power to take away my ownership of what of my stuff because of Hefker based and Hefker. And the moment I don't own it, I can't separate Truma. One of the ways that they would be able to do it. Bottom line is, fear toys the Yerushalmi, so Mechalfa shitosi the Rabbi Yosei. This will contradict. This is the opposite of what we learned yesterday, which is Taman hu Amar over there on the Mishnah Daf Tezayin, even though the Mishnah doesn't write Rabbi Yosei. The Mishnah says that b'mezid, it's not going to be effective. But we found that Rabbi Yosei argues. And he says that's not true. Even if you separate it min hatomei al hatoir, knowing masha asu asui. V'cha hu amar ein trumasa truma. So first of all, the fact is Rabbi Yosei agrees with our Mishnah. Olives for oil is not effective. Fact is, Rabbi Yosei says Tamei al Toher is effective. The question is why? Tamei for Toher is worse. So the Gemara says, and we're gonna read the Pnei Moshe after we learn the Gemara, and we'll see that he learns that the Gemara is giving two details in the answer. Taman over there, since Tuma is not Mitsuya, it's not common for people to have a product that's Tamei. We're speaking about the Chavedim. Ve'ein b'nei adam toyin loymar shetoymerim uma asrim ze el ze. Number 2. So let's read inside the Pnei Moshe. Look inside the Pnei Moshe, 9 lines from the top. Tamon shani hasim the tuma eina mitzuya. And v'chein ein b'nei adam toyin loymar shelechatchila toymerim uma asrim en atomei latoy. Everyone knows that you're not supposed to do menatoid alatomi. Everyone knows that. And so the possibility for this to happen is very little, and therefore, umekiven the loy chayshin and the asul mitei loy gazer b'habediyavet. However, Avalach, I'm reading in the Pnei Moshe, since the shchichei hein, what are you talking about? The only way you get oil is by having olives. Everyone has olives before they have oil, and if you were to allow it b'diyavet. The im oimer at kain, that what? If you were to say that b'diavad, the separation of the olives for the oil will be truma, people might lechatchila say you can do a lechatchila. So the chachamim here made a gzeira. I'm just saying the first point of tuma eina mitzuya is in itself an answer, because there's a rule that milsa the loy shchicha loy gazru barabanan, and on top of that, no one will learn from what you did. Everyone knows that you can't separate from Tamei Alatoir because it's that bad, because the kohen can't do anything with it. Olives for oil, some people can argue nishkaferlach, so you gave the kohen olives. He can use it. He has to work a little bit. I'm reading in the Gemara. Or the same, everything we said is the same. Since mitzuyin, so it's not a milsa de l'shchicha. And furthermore, other people might think that you can do it lachatchila ve'im omar at kain af hu savar meimer, that you shemutar litrim zeisem al Hashem, an observer lachatchila they would think, or va'anavim alayayin. So to prevent that from happening, the chachamim have that koyach, and they were goyzer. It's a derabanan that olives for oil is not going to be effective, even according to Rabbi Yosei. Elama machlekes b'shamein b'silol. What do we do for the olives on the olives? But the olives for the oil are not good. Okay. Aviv, you're good. You had a question yesterday.
For the second answer, Gazelle Sheva, that the ratio would still be good of olives to the olive oil. Because if you said after, let's say, 100 of olives, and they would become 50 fields of olive oil, to separate 2 fields of olives, that's still 2%. Even if we
Okay, you're saying that Aviv is struggling with the second interpretation, which was the first that we learned yesterday, on top of Daf Yud, that he doesn't see why separating. Let me go to the saw. A person has 100 saw, let's say, of olives, and they think, they're making everything into oil. So he's arguing, no. I have 100 saw of olives and I have 100 saw of oil. That's the case, Aviv. I have 100 already of oil. The 100 saw of oil came from 200 saw, but now I have 100 olives and 100 oil. So a person is going to separate for the olives 2 sa, which is correct, 2%. And a person might mistakenly say, I'm going to separate another 2 sa of olives for the oil. Because you're thinking in the quantity of sa. That's the mistake that might happen. I want to add one thing now that he brought up Gezel HaShevet quickly. There's a question in halacha. Is a person nowadays allowed to give the pidyon haben money to a minor kohen? If the only kohen around is a cotton. These questions came up after the war a lot. In other words, when the Yidden were murdered, so you had a kohen. Like today, you would say, what are you talking about? Go give it to his father. No, sometimes you can have, God forbid, a community where there's a kohen survivor. Can you give him pidyon haben? And don't forget, the mitzvah is to do it on day 31, not on day 30. It's after 30 days. And the answer is yes. The question is, how can you do that? That's the question. When a kohen cannot acquire, right? 2 days ago we spoke about the challenge, right? Gabriel brought it up, that how can a cotton get married? He can't. Not so simple. Kedushin. A cotton cannot acquire. So one of the logics that the Tzois uses for this is our Gemara. The fact that the Gemara says Gezel HaShevet, what does that mean? That means that Truma already belongs to the Kohanim. I don't know to which one. We're stealing already from the Kohanim. So same thing with pidyon haben. When the minor does not own it at all, he cannot acquire it so simple. So simply. I know that when there's a das acheres makna oisai, it works. Most people argue, the Ktsois argues for sure, that when it comes to Truma, I'm the Yisrael, I don't own my Truma enough to be a das acheres makna oisai, because I only have the toivas hana. The toivas hana for these dinim of kinyanim is not considered ownership. I only get to direct it. But on the other hand, the kohanim already own it. So it's not that he doesn't own it and now the cotton is acquiring it. No. Anyways, that's a gavaldik thing. Let's move on. Halacha Gimel. So like we mentioned in the intro, the whole Mishnah has one rule, but there are many, many, many examples of it. And really, you have to understand, we'll have to explain what's the chiddush of every single one. Some of them will be explained here in the Noisa Kalim. Some of them will be explained in the Gemara. And some of them we are expected to understand ourselves what's the novelty of one case over the other. But let's begin. So for those of us that were on this journey from the beginning of Yerushalmi, so we already learned, we are very much familiar with the dinim of leket shikcham peya. So Aviv, when you harvest grain, it's possible that 1 or 2 stalks will fall down from the hand of the reaper. That's called leket. Hashem says, leave it there for the poor. Shichacha is similar. When you are making sheaves, and you're gathering the sheaves, it's possible that you will forget 1 or 2 sheaves. Now, by the way, it's possible for you to forget more. But if I forget 3 stalks, then I am allowed to pick it up. It's not leket. If I forget 3 sheaves or more, I'm not commanded to let it to be on the field. But if it's that small amount, Hashem says, leave it there. And peah means that when you harvest the field, I have to leave an edge. It doesn't have to be at the edge. It could also be in the middle, but normally people left it at any edge of the field, unreaped, unharvested. And that's for the poor. That product has no obligation to have any tithes removed from it. It's like hefker. Furthermore, leket shikcham peya, if I'm the owner of the field, does not belong to me. So the Mishnah says, I cannot separate Truma Gedoyla from the leket shikcham peya. Really, by the leket shikcham peya, there are 2 reasons. As the Marafulda writes, we'll learn the Marafulda the top in the Mishnah. It's around 10 lines from the top of the Amid. Mi sheyesh le kri shel tevel. If I have a pile of tevel grain, eine yochol lahafrish olav truma, I cannot separate truma for it from leket or shikha or peya. Number 1, they don't belong to me. Imagine if I go to you and I separate from your produce truma to be mesaken mine. I can't do that. She'elu matnasaniyim. The ena yochel l'saken tivli b'matnasaniyim. So number 1 is I can't do that. Number two, inami mishum dahavale min aptur alachiu. In other words, even the ani himself doesn't have to separate. That's the amazing thing. When the ani picks up the leket, nothing has to be done. Not Truma Gedoyla, not Meiser Rishon, not Meiser garnished. It's exempted from all of the tithings. So it's a product that's already mesukan. It's already exempted. You cannot separate min aptur ala chiyuv. Really, you cannot separate min aptur ala aptur. The only thing is that what would happen if someone in their ignorance separates min aptur al aptur? What will happen? Nothing terrible happened. You understand, Aviv? If I'm an ani, God forbid, and I have a pile of shikha, and I don't know this din, so I separate 2% and I gave it to a kohen. Did I do anything bad? No. The truth is that what I gave to the kohen was not holy. Okay, so nishkafelah, so I gave him a gift. You understand? But if I'm going to use the shikha to separate truma for my tevel, gavaldik, that's terrible, because now my tevel remains tevel. And similarly, the next case in the Mishnah is hefker. Hefker is much broader. Hefker is when the product reached the point of gemar melacha. Hefker doesn't have to be hefker from when it was planted or when it grew on its own. But when the time of the chiyuv kicks in, which is by the grain, when you smooth the pile, if at that moment it's hefker, it's not chayiv to have anything removed from it. And therefore, if someone acquires that hefker, and they separate from hefker for their tevel, what they did is ineffective. Their tevel remained tevel as it always was. V'loi be my sedishin shenitletum masoi. Now it gets very fun. So here, let me just give you a heads up. Normally, when do you separate my sedishin? After Truma Gedoyla. Once you separated Truma Gedoyla, as far as Truma is concerned, everything is already considered misukan or patur, exempt. The Mishnah just told you that something that is not chayiv in having Truma separated from it may never be used to separate Truma Gedoyla for Banafai Tevel. So the fact that the Mishnah says that you cannot separate Truma Gedoyla, Veloimi Maser Rishon Shenitl Trumasai, like it's completely superfluous. Nah, the Mishnah is speaking about something else. The Mishnah is speaking about Meiser Rishon, that you separated from the Meiser Rishon, Meiser min ha-Meiser, that's the Meiser Rishon Shenitl Trumasai. Once you separated Meiser min ha-Meiser from the Meiser Rishon, now you cannot use this to separate Truma Gedoyla. Again, what are you talking about? And before you separated Meiser min ha-Meiser, our Mishnah, this line and the next line is speaking about someone who gave Meiser Rishon prior to the Meruach. So now we learned this in the Rambam, so we keep on reviewing it. Really, there are two steps when it comes to giving all of the tithings. Step number one is this a product? Forget about, is it completed? Is it a product? When would something not be a product? Generally, before it reaches a third of its growth, or before the seed in the product began to develop. At that point, even though you can say it's called grain, halachically it's not grain. It's not shayach. It doesn't belong to the whole parsha of tithings. Now, once you have a product, when are you chayiv to tithe it? When it's a completed product. So by the grain, when you smooth the pile. Prior to that, you're not obligated. Hold that thought. Now, another din. You have to separate trumas from maisris on the right order. What comes first, Truma Gedoyla? So Aviv, remember this. What happens if I smooth my pile and I gave the Levi 10%? I did not separate Truma Gedoyla. What happens now? Now I want to give you numbers. Let me go back to apples. Let's say that the completed product of apples is when they're gathered in the basket, or when you brought them into the house. We're going to learn about this later. Okay, if I brought them into my house, and by mistake, instead of me separating, what should I do now? 2 apples to the coin. How many apples do I have left? 98. From the 98, how much do I give to the Levi? Exactly 10%, 9.8. The Levi gets us 9.8, and from it he gives 10% to the coin. How much does the Levi have left? He has exactly 8.8. No, I take that back. Because he doesn't give. Very good, Vlad. How much does he have left? Vlad is good with numbers. He has more than that. 8.9. Whatever the exact numbers. Now, 1 second. What happens if
Exactly, 8.9.
8.9. If I, by mistake, I didn't give the Levi 9.8. You know why not? Because I didn't give Truma Gedoyla. I gave 10% to the Levi. How much did the Levi get? 10. 10 doesn't belong to him. The Levi cannot just separate 10% from the 10, which would be 1. How much will he have then? He'll have 9. He doesn't. 9 does not belong to him. The Levi now has to fix my mistake because he got something that did not have Truma Gedoyla removed from it. So the Levi has to make 2 separations. He has to separate the Truma Gedoyla, part in it, not all of my Truma Gedoyla, and the Meiser Men HaMeiser. That the product reached the Gemar Melacha. I smoothed the pile. I brought it into the house. I put it in the basket. But what happens if the Levi got Meiser Rishon prior? It's called Bishi Balim, when it was still in stalks, prior to the Meruach. First of all, no one was obligated to give anything to the Levi. But I gave it to the Levi. And I forgot to take off Truma Gedoyla. In this case, the Levi does not have to take off Truma Gedoyla. That's what the Mishnah is trying to tell you. The Levi has to take off Meiser Men HaMeiser. If the Levi wants, we already had this in Masechtas Trumais. If the Levi wants, he can take my whole 10 apples. I gave him 10 apples before it was completed. Not 9.8 because I didn't take off Truma Gedoyla. You know what the Levi can do? He can make all of the 10 apples Truma. If the Levi has another 90 apples, now he has 100, he can say all of this becomes Truma Gedoyla. In other words, what the Levi receives could become entirely Truma Gedoyla. But once you have Meiser Rishon Shenitl Trumasoi, Truma, meaning Truma, which is Meiser Men HaMeiser, was separated. Even though no Truma Gedoyla was given, since the Levi got the Meiser Rishon Bishi Balin before the Gemar Melacha, the Levi does not have to give Truma Gedoyla. So this is completely exempted from Truma Gedoyla. So now, if someone wants to use this for Tevel, they cannot do it because this is Mamish Potter. That's the word of the Mishnah. And similarly, so the same thing. If we're speaking about a normal scenario, this Meiser Sheni is superfluous. If I separated Truma Gedoyla and I separated Meiser Rishon and then I separated Meiser Sheni, of course the Meiser Sheni cannot be used to be poida, to be misaken tevel. Of course not. Because it's already rectified, it's potter. Here we're speaking about someone who gave Meiser Sheni Bishibolin. They did not give Truma Gedoyla. So the vart is, you never have to give Truma Gedoyla. And since you never have to give Truma Gedoyla, even when it's redeemed, you can never use it to be misaken tevel. And the same thing is with Hegdish.
So, Rabbi, you just said Meiser Shady. So what happens to Meiser Rishon?
Same thing, Vlad. In other words, I have to give everything on the order.
Correct.
So,
that's what I think. You have to give
I'll speak it out.
Truma Gedoyla, then Meiser Rishon,
I'm happy to
then
speak it out.
Meiser Shady.
We have to speak it out. If I have a smooth pile, and the Chacham, I separated Meiser Sheni. No, the Meiser Sheni is not our Meiser, because in the Meiser Sheni, there is Truma Gedoyla. In the Meiser Sheni, there's Meiser Rishon. Many things have to happen to the Meiser Sheni. But if I separated Meiser Sheni 10%, I had 100 apples. They were not completed. And I say, 10 apples is Meiser Sheni. Bishibalin, prior to when the Chiyuv was Chal, that Meiser Sheni is only Meiser Sheni. And that Meiser Sheni will never need to have Truma Gedoyla removed from it. Even after the Meiser Sheni becomes completed. Same thing with Hegdish. Hegdish, when the Gemar Melacha happened, while it was consecrated, Lebedek Habayis, like when it's Hefker, there's no chiyuv of being ma'ased, anything. And even after you redeem it, this never has to be tithed. In other words, the Mishnah is writing here all different scenarios. Each one has something new we never learned about yet. That this, bottom line is, this product never needs to have Truma Gedolah removed from it, which means it's Mesukan. If something is Mesukan, that cannot be used to be Mesakin other Tevel. Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis. Now we're going in the opposite direction. And this line we're going to get to in the Gemara, God willing, in the bottom of this Amid. This is really linked to Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan when we learned yesterday about separating oil for olives. We're going to come back to that. Now, what we learned on Amid Aleph is really, the Gemara is going to ask, why did the Mishnah even have to write this line? Because that's the neshama of all of the examples we gave in up until now. The Gemara will address that. Another dim. Mechubar is also not chayiv. It's ineffective if you did it. It's ineffective. Gewaldig. Furthermore, so produce that's grown in 1 year. Now we learned about this not that long ago, whether I think it was in Shvius and maybe in the earlier Masechtas. How do you measure what year it belongs to? There are two determiners. You have to know what stage of the product are we talking about, and you have to know when is it's Rosh Hashanah. So just as an example, by fruits, we view the blooming, the chanata of the fruit to be, now the fruit is here. By most products, did it reach a third? When does it need to reach a third? So for fruits, to B'Shvat, according to Beishamai, Rosh Chodesh Shvat. By other products, it's Rosh Hashanah, in which you have to know when is the Rosh Hashanah. You have to know what stage does that need to reach by the Rosh Hashanah. But by knowing that and by applying it, you will have which year does it belong to. What years are we talking about? That the Shemitah cycle is divided into 7 years. The first year and the second year, by the way, have one series of laws of Trumas U'Maisris. Aviv, Truma Gedolah always, Meiser Rishon always. In the first and second year, after Meiser Rishon, you have to separate Meiser Sheni. In the third year, Truma Gedolah, Meiser Rishon, no Meiser Sheni, Meiser Ani. Same 10% from what remains, give it to the poor. Fourth and the fifth, Meiser Sheni. Sixth, Meiser Ani. Shvi'is, nothing, because it's like Hefker. We just had it in our Mishnah. Since everyone has the right to take everyone's product, none of that has to be tithed at all. Nothing. Now, if I have product of 1 year and product of another year, and for whatever reason, I did not yet separate any Truma Gedolah, one would think, well, they're both obligated in Truma Gedolah. It's min achiyuv ala chiyuv. No, says the Mishnah. You cannot separate product from 1 year on the other year, whether it's last year for this year, whether this year for last year. So the question on this line of the Mishnah is, we just said that you cannot separate min aptur ala chiyuv. Peiros chutz la'aretz is ptur. What's the chiddush of this line in the Mishnah? And the answer is, like we spoke about in our introduction, that produce that grows outside Eretz Yisrael, if it was imported to the Holy Land in or unprocessed state, so you import it to the Holy Land, shibalim, stalks that have kernels in it, and you do the processing, you bring it to its Gemar Malacha in the Holy Land. It's amazing. That product has to be tithed mideh oiraisa, but it's called Peiros Chutz La'aretz. So says the Holy Mishnah, that's it. So it's already dissimilar. You cannot separate Trumas U'Maisros one on the other. Now, in all of the cases of the Mishnah, says the Gemara, it says the Mishnah, im tarmu, not only may you not do it lachatchila, but even if you did it, ein trumasoi truma, even post facto, it will be ineffective. Now, let us begin. The first three of the Mishnah was leket shikhan peya, right? That you cannot designate it as truma for other product. Rabbi Yochanan b'shem Rabbi Yanai ze echad mishloisha mikrois michuvarim shabatoyim. These are one of the 3 verses regarding truma, in which the source is as if it was written explicit. When it comes to Torah Shebal Peh, the main Torah is Torah Shebal Peh. Is this din explicit in the Torah? As far as halacha is concerned, Aviv, makes no difference. Right? We're not allowed to write on Shabbos. Yeah, tell me, where does it say in the Torah don't write on Shabbos? Doesn't say explicit. We have a limud. We learn it. We juxtapose it to Malachas HaMishkan. When it came to the building of the Mishkan, they needed to write. Where did they need to write in the Mishkan? Who knows? It's not just writing the blueprints. Remember how when they would put the beams in the Mishkan, and when they put it on the wagons, when they would build them up together, you needed to know what beam goes with what beam. So they would letter the beams. So there was writing involved. Okay. Is there any nafkemina whether a limud is explicit or learned from a drasha? There are various nafkeminas in halacha. We have enough time. I'll give you one example in the Darim. It's not fascinating. In the beginning, on Daf Ches in Bavli, so the Gemara says like this: that first of all, there's a rule that ein neder chala neder ve'ein shvua chala al shvua. If I'm already obliged to do something because of an oath, if I repeat that oath, the second oath is ineffective. So if, God forbid, I violated, I only violated one oath. We learn also in the Darim that all of us are bound now in this life for the oath that we gave to God when we stood around Har Sinai, even though it wasn't in this body, and we committed ourselves to keeping of the mitzvahs. So generally, if I were to make an oath or a neder to keep mitzvahs, it's ineffective because I'm already mushba v'oimed mahar Sinai. That's the theory. However, the Gemara says, in the middle of the Amid, that I'm reading it again, Bavli Nidarim Daf Chesam Adalef. If a person tells his friend, Nashkim v'nishna paid exam, I'm making a commitment, I'm making an oath that I'm waking up in the morning and we're going to learn Yerushalmi. So the din is, or a paid exam, or mesechtazu, neder gadol nader l'lekei Yisrael. It's a neder. If it doesn't say bli neder. So asks the Gemara, why is it a neder? We are already commanded to learn the Torah. We are already commanded to learn the Torah. So we already took that oath. So answers the Gemara, no. If you wanted, you could have exempted your obligation of learning Torah by simply reading Shema in the morning and reading Shema at night. You would have fulfilled your obligation to learn Torah. You're saying that aside of saying the Shema, you're also going to get up and you're going to learn Yerushalmi. Ooh, that's something new. Chayil Shvua. Asks the Ran in the Nedarim, we don't have choices. We have the Ran. He says, what are you talking about? He says, you think that midoiraisa you can fulfill your obligation of learning Torah? By what? By reading the Shema in the morning and at night? How can that be? This week's Chitas. Tan Rabbanan Vishinantam. It's amazing. In the first parsha of Shema, Parshas Voschanan, it doesn't say Vilimadetem Levonecha. Should have said Vilimadetem Levonecha. What does it say? Vishinamtam. So why Vishinamtam? So there are many interpretations. One is that Shiyu Divrei Torah Mechudadam Beficha. That you have to learn Torah to the level that you're so sharp that whatever you are asked, Al Shaloi Tegam game, you shouldn't start stuttering and muttering. You should know the answer right away. But for that, reading Shema in the morning and at night, you'll know how to answer any question in the Torah. For that, you have to learn day and night. How can the Gemara say you could have gotten away? Says that on a big rule. And he says that what do we have explicit in the Torah? Vishinamta, v'dibarta bam, to read the Shema. We know that we have to learn day and night, but that's not explicit. By the way, v'higisa b'yoyim v'layla is a pasuk I think in Yeshua. It's not a pasuk in the Chumash. So he says, as far as mushba v'oimed mahar Sinai is concerned, that ein shvua chalal shvua, that only applies to something that's written explicitly in the Chumash. If something is not written explicitly in the Chumash, even though we committed to it on Har Sinai, I could make a new oath about it right now. That's it on. I'm just giving you one example where we differentiate whether something is explicit or not. So now you understand our Gemara. B'shem Rabbi Yanai, that regarding the halachas of Truma, there are 3 dinim that are so almost explicit in the Torah, it's as if it's explicit. And this is one of them. That what? That a product that has no owners is exempted to be tithed. Almost explicit, like it's explicit. Vushtate. So it says in Parshas Re'eh, Uba halevi ke'ein lechelik v'nachla imach. We're speaking about, the Torah says, why does the Levi get Meiser Ishain? Because he has no portion in the, just to know, Chelek and Nachla. Who knows the difference between Chelek and Nachla? Chelek is the Levi was not given a part in the spoils of war. Remember that. That's Chelek. Nachla means he was not given a part of the Holy Land itself when Yeshua divided the land for all of the tribes. Not this, not that. So God says, Hashem says, so therefore I'll give the Levi my sedition. From whom does he get it? He gets it from someone who did get a chelik v'nachla. So Gavaldik. So says Rabbi Yanai, God is basically writing an item that has ownership is an item that has to be gifted to the Levi. Right? Because I own it and the Levi doesn't own any land. But something that has no owners, hefker, or leka chikhopeya, it doesn't have to be given at all. There's no tithing from it. Yotze hefker, again in the Yerushalmi, hefker is with a vase, not with a fei. Just to know that in the Torah, if you look inside the pay, you'll see a vase. Do you know that? If you read in Ksav Ashuris, if they write the pay properly, past the mouth, what should be in your mouth? The Torah begins with a base, Bereshis. That's how I was taught. So in your mouth, the mouth was given to learn Torah. Yotze hefker, sheyotcha v'yodei shaven boy. And that is, he leket, he shikcha, he pay hefker gevaldik. Okay. So let's hop until the end of the Amud. So when the Mishnah said, and we have this on top of Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis, and it looks like, if you just read on top of the Amud, that the Girsa in the Gemara, okay, let's go. Why did the Mishnah have to say that line? It's already known from the examples we gave before. By saying that you are exempt from Lekad, Shikha, Pei, and Hefker, the Vart is, because it's already exempted. It's ptur. Why did the Mishnah have to repeat like a prat and a klal? Answers the Gemara, Kachi Masnisa. This is why, to tell you something that you might not have known. So we spoke out already before that really there are 2 critical points when it comes to Trumas u'Maisros. This is something that we came to our Chevra when we learned the Rambam, which was great. Point number 1 is, prior to a product reaching a third of its size, and there are exceptions to that, but the nekuda of a shlish is that it's prior to it reaching a third, it's unable to reproduce. It's not shaykh to the trade of Trumas u'Maisros. So when we spoke today about someone was shehigdim b'shibalim, remember the case that we gave Aviv, a guy gave it out of the order prior to the Meruach, it's effective. That's because it already reached a shlish. If it didn't even reach a shlish, then it's bachlal. If you did something, it's completely nonsensical. It does nothing. So what were to happen if you took from Peder, Sheviyah Shlish, and if you says, I'm tithing it, Al Peder Shelo Hiviyah Shlish, you might have thought that that would be effective. You're giving it for a product that's potter. No, because throughout Chazal, we have a rule many times that if something is fit, if something is ra'ui or kol ha'oimed, it's as if it's already there. If something is connected to the ground, not disconnected, connected to the ground, that means if things are the way they are, it will reach a shlish. One might have thought that if I have bona fide chiyuv product here after the miruach, and I'm saying I'm separating not only 2% for it, I'm also separating for the grain that's on the field that's not even a shlish. One might have thought, that's min chiyuv al aptur, that it will be effective. Why will it be effective? Because it will reach the chol ha'oimed, ka'oimed dami. You would have thought so. Komash malon, that we don't say that. We do not say that. Why is that? Because 2 things are needed. One is you have to harvest it. Harvesting it, says that Asher Ilyo, is something that's biyadi to do. I'm able to do it. It reaching a shlish is not in my hands. And you're saying it's natural. Yeah, natural. If God wants, God can send a wind blast and or all of these little animals that go and eat everything up, right? And we counter it today by poisoning the food. But all of these things are not up to me. And therefore, it's ineffective. And finally, let's have one more line over here. The im taram ein truma say truma, even b'di'eved. So let's quickly go back to what we learned yesterday. Let's go b'shitas Beishamai. Chizkiah said yesterday on Daf Yud that when Beishamai says that olives for the oil are ineffective, it's only in that direction, said Chizkiah. Olives for the oil. What happens in the reverse? So we said Beishamai would agree to Beis Hillel that even post facto it's not effective. That's min achiyuv al aptur, which means that according al date the Chizkiah, when the Mishnah writes min achiyuv al aptur, even b'di'evet it's not truma, that statement is not only according to Beis Hillel but l'divrei Hakel. This is Gavaldik. But when we had yesterday, Rabbi Yochanan argued with Chizkiah, and Rabbi Yochanan said that Shitas Beishamai, that he says that your truma is effective, is not only olives for oil, but even oil for olives. Oil is chiyuv, olives is pater. Beishamai says it will be effective. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, our Mishnah, this statement is really contingent on the machloikas Beishamai and Beis Hillel. In other words, this statement is only l'das Beis Hillel, not l'das Beishamai. So why didn't the Mishnah say that? I'll tell you why. Because there's a big rule that Beishamai, b'makim Beis Hillel, we don't even learn. It's amazing. Sometimes Rabbeinu HaKadosh found it important to tell us what Beishamai held. But we b'chlal don't follow that opinion. Machloikas v'charkach stam. Here, fakert, according to Rabbi Yochanan, Rebbe Dafke was soisim, our Mishnah, Keshitas Beis Hillel, because really, according to Beishamai, he would not agree with the statement. According to Beishamai, Menachiyuv al aptur b'di'evid would be Truma. Gavaldik. We finished the daf. God willing to be continued.